There is no better person than David Gilmour. To him, quiet and the soul are one. The guy whose dark strat elevated the everlasting prayer, in a state of blissful indifference transform the heartbreaking melodies of "You Crazy Diamond" into an endless dirge of melancholy. Performing music was not all he did. He took anguish and turned it into music, formed ethereal sanctuaries of loss and beauty, leaving behind music that has the power to evoke awe in millions. He had a multi-faceted career spanning several decades, a serene tempest whose solos ripped deeper than words could express. He was the embodiment of human suffering and transcendence. However, that genius was etched with tears and blood. The friend driven insane by the burden of leaving Syd Barrett to his whims. As Richard Wright succumbs to a terrible illness, the brother is unable to do anything to stop him, and the artist left with the wounds of betrayal. He was cruelly abandoned by the band he had rescued from obscurity. Anyone could have been killed by those catastrophic events. Despite this, he persisted, creating music out of his every wound. Millions are shocked by the impending silent gloom, which comes at 79 years of age, just when the world thought he had finally found peace after seemingly endless storms. Pink Floyd, the quiet genius, is haunted by what ghost? Before we start, please like this in memory of David Gilmour, who transformed into music the most exquisite expression of human suffering that the world has ever witnessed. A legend is built not just from victory, but also from an unhealable tragedy. That silent wound started for David Gilmour. He would never play the same note again, because of the brutal quiet. It breaks my heart to think that a remarkable rock singer came from a home where reason prevailed over emotion, and where laughing was non-existent during family dinners. In Cambridge, England, on March 6, 1946, a baby was born. His mother, Sylvia, was a teacher and later a film editor, while his father, Douglas, was a zoologist and university lecturer. From the outside looking in, it appeared to be an advantage. An intellectually stimulating home in Grantchester, with books on every shelf. It was something else entirely, a forgotten emptiness, to the boy who sat silently at that table. Gilmour would use those same words to describe it years later, when he remembered a type of apathy that hurt more than any physical harm, rather than anarchy or poverty. Invisible yet everlasting scars were left by a stillness. Despite having siblings, he never felt truly at home. Even in his childhood's quiet rooms, nobody paid attention. His mother gave him a guitar when he was 10 years old, little realizing she was about to change the course of music forever. Disappearing inside his room, illuminated only by a lamp, he found himself without a teacher or any direction. The night was filled with the crackle of a radio, as a young boy stooped over strings. It was not practice to play each riff over and over again. Survival was key, the sole means of communication in a home that never acknowledged his presence. David sculpted emotion into sound by twisting strings till they sobbed, while other kids in the playground yelled. His impression of the world was clouded by darkness by the time he was 13 years old. Already, the thought of his own mortality was nagging at him, a reminder of how transient life is. David, unconcerned with his grades or his social circle, frequently retreated from his peers at Cambridge's Per School, as they played and argued. Some time later, while he was a student at Cambridge College of Arts and Technology, he crossed paths with Roger Waters and Syd Barrett, two other students whose names would become intertwined in folklore. However, at that time, he stayed confined to the guitar, which had become his sanctuary, and his world seemed narrower and less expansive. A lot of seedlings were planted during those lonely hours, the beginnings of a musical style that would one day fill stadiums with a paralyzing quiet. instead of a childhood filled with shattered glass and violent conflicts. This one was defined by a sinister stillness that weighed heavily on the spirit. Still, he built resilience amid that silence. He mastered the art of transforming emptiness into beauty, of making a single note convey more agony than words, and of transforming solitude into a sonic cathedral. From an unheard of young man, he blossomed into a man whose guitar could drown out a sea of voices. Quietness did not faze him. He ended the eerie quiet and used it to create music that has never been heard before, rather than ending in victory. Every meaningful journey starts with adversity. The journey of David Gilmour started with a lack of food. While Roger Waters and Syd Barrett were making a name for themselves in London's psychedelic underground in the early 1960s, David was playing in obscure local bands like Joker's Wild to make ends meet. A talented guitarist with an exceptional touch, but no permanent home on stage. In pursuit of their musical aspirations, he and his companions sank to France. Nevertheless, the path was inhumane. The guitars disappeared, we lost our amplifiers, expenditures vanished. On some evenings, the only option was completely out of the question. The precise thing that he used to sell his soul for bread. A pawn. David strummed for pennies in Parisian wayside cafes and on cobblestone streets while tourists ignored him, since he lived not for the praise, but for the survival of his band. Pink Floyd was making waves around the globe. Europe seemed like a never-ending path of hungry travelers and calloused fingers to David. Those left behind can learn a hard lesson about the harshness of fate. Upon his eventual return to London, he had taken nothing with him. No instruments, no band, just an unwavering will. Then the shock hit, and it hurt worse than hunger ever did. Syd Barrett, the child he had busked with on Cambridge streets, was now frontman of one of Britain's most talked about bands when he visited a studio where Pink Floyd was recording. On the other hand, Syd had changed. He exhibited glassy eyes, garbled speech, and jerky movements. Years of extensive drug use and the beginning of severe mental illness had shattered the seemingly unstoppable light of brilliance. The symptoms that physicians would come to identify as being similar to schizophrenia. When he glanced across at David, he hardly recognized him. Behold, the companion who had formerly adorned sound with hues unseen by others was vanishing right before his very eyes. He lost control of his thoughts. David, a friend and eyewitness to the fall of genius, stood by. It was more than just tragic. It shook with fear. He no longer recognized the boy he had previously looked up to. Plus, the band that Syd had assembled was about to collapse. Another twist of fate occurred in 1967. Not looking for a successor, Pink Floyd invited Gilmour to join as a last-ditch fix. When Syd was unable to continue performing, a fifth member was supposed to step in. For a couple of bizarre performances, 4 musicians and 1 man drifted silently across the stage. As David turned back, he saw Syd, guitar slung loosely around his neck, eyes wide and still, as if the light had suddenly turned to stone. The pain was too much. The judgment was swiftly reached with a chilling brutality. They just stopped picking up Syd when they were on their way to a gig. David Gilmour was officially named Pink Floyd's lead guitarist that night. He was the man the supporters looked to as the successor of a living icon. He was the one who had just left David's friend for crazy in David's eyes. That scar would always be with him. However, appearing with Pink Floyd did not put a stop to the fight. Having lost their original visionary, the band was in a state of disarray, because he was so overwhelmed and confused by the music. David would occasionally play with his back to the crowd when he was on stage. Not much of a statement, more of a survival mechanism, was their 1968 debut album, Without Syd, A Saucer Full of Secrets. If they stopped moving and playing, the dream would die. Movie scores such as Moore 1969 and Obscured by Clouds 1972 were utilized. Unglamorous job, but essential. They may get money from studios and get into secret projects to test their ideas. David honed his guitar playing skills over these sessions. The endless sustain, the painful bends, and the lengthy delay that would come to define him. Something remarkable then materialized out of this haze of doubt. Echoes, the centerpiece of the 1971 metal album, was a 23-minute epic that took up a whole side of vinyl. A new identity was being formed from the ashes of anarchy. By the sound of four men breathing in unison. The first ping of Gilmour's guitar pierced through the air like a beacon in the night. At the very end, the music built up to a massive instrumental C. Pink Floyd had a pulse again, after the absence of Sid, and that rhythm was played by David's guitar. Along the way, I had felt guilty about being left behind, and then forcibly shoved into the limelight. And I had been hungry. Invisible and broken, he had strolled the European boulevards. A buddy of his had gone insane, and he had watched. Having to step in and take his position had been humiliating, and the prospect of addressing crowds without a plan, a leader, or any assurance had been terrifying. David Gilmour persisted. Nonetheless, despite it all, he made voice out of ambiguity, compassion out of remorse, and endurance out of hunger. The years of hardship gave birth to his guitar's voice, a voice that would resound through arenas and endure the depths of despair. David Gilmour's guitar became more than just an instrument in the 1970s. It became the beating heart of an entire generation. With the arrival of the moon's shadow, everything changed. Breathe carried his soaring voice. He etched eternity into time with his solos, while performing on the grand stage in the sky. His scat lines became entangled with Claire Torrey's wail, and his riff elevated the sound of coin clacking to that of a song. It wasn't merely a record. For 15 years, it dominated the charts and sold millions upon millions of copies. After years of being considered a cult act, Pink Floyd finally became a worldwide phenomenon. Gilmour was at the heart of it all, twisting a single note until it seemed boundless and causing the stadia to collapse into a respectful stillness. Despite this, the specters remained unquieted. It was more of a funeral liturgy than a record. Wish You Were Here. The song, Shine On You, Crazy Diamond, began with 4 lonely notes, each one representing a tear dropping for their former leader, Syd Barrett, who had a broken spirit due to his addiction and untreated disease, and had passed away both mentally and physically. Wish You Were Here was not a performance for Gilmour. A melody was born out of sorrow. Disappearance recorded on record. Each word carried the shadow of Sid, and he could hardly bring himself to sing it. Perpetually youthful, eternally disoriented, silent and inaccessible, once again it was a work of art for the fans. For David, it served as a stark reminder of the destructive power of addiction and the devastating toll it can take on one's life. Potential futures are taken from under people. Whereas Gilmour's guitar gnawed at mankind, Waters's lyrics oozed wrath. The cracks widened with animals. Then the wall came along, which was both celebrated and used as a battleground. Comfortably Numb became their battleground in the studio. Orchestral sadness was demanded by Waters. In a blazing return, Gilmour created one of the most legendary solos ever recorded, but it was unbearably expensive. Rick Wright, Gilmour's reserved and loyal brother, was demoted to the status of a hired worker while the album was being recorded. Gilmour could feel the stage becoming colder, the connection becoming thinner, and the band's soul fading away behind the flying pigs and disintegrating bricks. And even when it was at its peak, he would later confess, "I felt the music losing its meaning." And then the shame set in. Gilmour was demoted to the role he bitterly referred to as a session player in my own band, and the final version carried Waters' fingerprints on every track save name. He was silent, his aura dissipated. News outlets reported Waters' assertion that Pink Floyd was over when he left and sued to dissolve the name. It was as if the guy who had preserved their music had never been significant. In an instant, 20 years of Gilmour's existence appeared to go away. Loss on the job was only part of it. Erase was the term. Still, Gilmour would not vanish. Returning to the studio, he remained silent and determined, allowing his guitar to express himself when words failed. Stadiums were packed despite skeptics' doubts, thanks to a fleeting loss of reason. 7 years down the road, the division bell rang with the messages of making amends and re-establishing equality as partners. Millions of dollars were made during its tour. Pulse preserved their strength forever. Finally, the burden of being only a substitute began to fade. Floyd was not a solo act. Along with Gilmour it was. However, not even victory could banish death. Standing shoulder to shoulder for the final time at Live 8 in 2005 were the classic four: Gilmour, Waters, Wright, and Mason. The song, Comfortably Numb, was more than that. This was the rebirth, a reunion of the four men whose lives had been shattered by animosity and silence, now breathing as one. It was as if time had temporarily forgotten about them, and the years seemed to melt away. Thunder was the sound of the crowd's roar. However, a shadow appeared behind Gilmour's eyes, as if he was aware that the miracle would never endure. 3 years down the road, that dread materialized. Rick Wright, who was his steadying presence and brother in harmony, passed away at the young age of 65 due to cancer, the most fundamental symmetry, according to Gilmour. Sid succumbed to insanity. Rick was fatally wounded. Plus, the band they had created together became nothing more than a collection of records, photos, and specters. The loss of a buddy was only one component. The fundamental essence of Pink Floyd was extinguished. Then, stitched together from bits of Wright's music, the seemingly unending river emerged. A recording that was more akin to a seance than an album. With every chord came the sound of a man's voice whispering over the gap. A man who could no longer perform onstage with him. For everyone else, it was just music. It was a requiem, a goodbye, and the last gasp of a fraternity that Gilmour knew could never be revived. Gilmour then went inward. Since he stopped aiming for show, his solo work has been more sincere. A guy who could find solace in both beauty and anguish was shown in his 2006 song, On an Island, which featured lyrics written by his wife Polly Sampson. Freedom, adventure, and the voice of a survivor were all present in 2015's Rattle That Lock. Returning to Pompeii, the same spot he had stood with Floyd when he was a young guy, he played guitar solo as gracefully as he closed the circle. A tragic hero. David Gilmour's career has an uplifting and tragic trajectory. Even though he filled stadiums with his sound, he returned home to find stillness. He continued playing despite the wounded ego caused by betrayal. He kept his friends' voices alive through his strings, even though they were all gone. Hunger became resilience, guilt became compassion, and loss became eternal music through his transformational work. Whoever pawned his guitar for food, as a young man went on to create immortal music. Even at this darkest hour, when all hope is lost, the sound of David Gilmour's guitar pierces the air. For everyone who has ever loved, lost, and persevered, there is an everlasting voice. The sound of a packed stadium may give him a sense of eternal life. After the lights went out and the audience left, David Gilmour was met with a hush that no stage could ever withstand. Brutal cracks appeared in Pink Floyd, but what followed was much more devastating: the crumbling of his very own house. His marriage, the one place he should have felt safe, started to fall apart right as the band he had helped survive was breaking up. The marriage of David and Virginia Ginger Hazenbein, an attractive American model and artist, took place in 1975 during Floyd's peak of success. The light of potential shone through their formative years. Pictures of them laughing at each other's jokes reveal a young couple, their spirits lifted by music and optimism, stood on the brink of an apparently limitless future. Gilmour, who had wished for the presence of his parents when he was a lad, but had instead grown up in a cold household, saw marriage as an opportunity to create a more welcoming home for his children. Then came 4 more kids, with Alice in 1976, Claire in 1979, Sarah in 1981, and Matthew in 1986. The house was filled with the commotion and activity of life, with cries reverberating down the halls, little feet rushing to meet him, and little hands pulling at his sleeves as he came back from tours. There was something more significant waiting for him at home than any encore, and he used those years as a reminder of that. However, as the 1980s progressed, the stress of a life lived under continual pressure started to permeate every aspect of his being. The group was breaking apart. People started to doubt his position. The outside world, however, portrayed him more as a stand-in than the artist behind the song. The duration of absences at home increased. Daytime dragged on into weeks, and weeks into months. After spending so much time glowing alongside him, Ginger became tired of always being second fiddle to a man who meant the world to millions of people. Even at such a young age, the kids would wonder why Dad was gone for so long. More painful than any criticism from a critic were the questions. I was witnessing the disintegration of my marriage concurrent with the dissolution of the band. David would later confess with the subtle remorse of someone who seldom showed his pains. I don't think the full extent of the harm was apparent to me until much later. Even though David's divorce in 1990 was quiet and unremarkable, it rocked him to his core. He used to be the one who could captivate an audience with just one note. Even his own family was a mess because of him. Friends remember him entering the studio in those days with a hollowed-out expression, his guitar slung over his shoulder like a weight instead of a gift. Ginger stayed with the children most of the time, even though David was still a part of their lives. The loss of a partner and the separation from the daily chaos of fatherhood were the 2 wounds that hurt him the most. The thrill of just being there, the stories told before bed, and the laughter shared during supper. We were young, Ginger would whisper in her latter years, and we loved each other very much, but the world was just too noisy and all-consuming. Eventually, it submerged us. David seldom discussed his loss, only occasionally bringing it up. His greatest joy in life were the 4 children they had together. Even after the papers were signed, he couldn't shake the memory of his ruined marriage. The fall of the one location he had sought solace was like a new wound inflicted upon a musician whose work had always been born from pain. Not from a critic or bandmate, but from his own personal tragedies. Occasionally, hope emerges from the shadows left by tragedy. Polly Sampson was a journalist and writer whose work exhibited both sensitivity and fire. David Gilmour met her in the early 1990s. And that was the moment when the light bulb went off. Polly came as an anchor and a flame where his first marriage had crumbled due to distance and quiet, because they shared an artistic vocabulary, and she appeared to grasp that Gilmour's music was more of a means of subsistence than an occupation. She was more than just a friend, she was an equal partner. I found not just love but honesty. With Polly, he would think afterwards, she spoke to me when I was speechless. In 1994, despite facing personal and professional challenges, they tied the knot. As they prepared to release the division bell, Pink Floyd maintained their status as a titan in the eyes of the world. However, there was a more personal quality to the music. The record and their relationship are built upon Polly's words that Gilmour sets to music. Their creative connection is like a scaffolding. Her lyrical expertise was evident in songs such as High Hopes. Those sentences meant something different to David than they did to the audience, who perceived echoes of grandeur and sadness. A personal note from his wife incorporated into Pink Floyd's music. When the music served as both a confession and a communion, it was one of those rare occasions when the private and public spheres merged. The joy of children's presence quickly enveloped their home. They had 4 children together, which brought the total number of children from David's first marriage to 8. The house, which had been peaceful before the breakup, was now filled with the cacophony of children's laughter, the sound of feet walking around, the cries of anguish, and the monotony of daily existence. This was a rebirth for the man who had returned home to icy solitude before. In those years, David was not the spectral figure hunched over a guitar, according to friends who visited. Instead, he was a father sitting on the floor with toys all around him, or a husband gently strumming, as Polly drew lines on a notepad close by. The process was both domestic and alchemical, turning anguish into unity. Polly has expressed her feelings about their relationship just as passionately. "I never felt like I was walking in the shadow of a living legend." She had commented, "I was stepping into a life, and it was a life we were building together." David, on the other hand, was haunted by the traumas of his last marriage and the absorption of his children, who lived mainly with grandma. With Polly's help, though, he was able to accept his specters without letting them consume him. She served as a reflection of himself and a safe haven, showing him that even the most accomplished artists are human beings in need of love, acceptance, and a place to call home. Their collaborative artistic relationship flourished throughout the years. Polly penned the intimately bombastic lyrics for Gilmour's solo albums, notably 2006 On, which topped the UK charts. The tunes conveyed a sense of tranquility, introspection, and the understated victory of enduring, words that complemented her singing voice and his guitar. A less shackled Gilmour emerged in 2015, thanks to Rattle That Lock. She was still on the prowl, but she was whole again. The unwavering support of a companion who had weathered every tempest with him found its way into his music. Their incredible story is shaped not just by the music they created, but also by the life they constructed. Polly offered Gilmour a second chance after a lifetime of disorder, drugs, and severed relationships. Not emancipation, not perfection, but equilibrium. Words flowed, music healed, and love endured in a home where the guy who had previously silently witnessed his family's breakdown now found himself a part of. David Gilmour considered Polly Sampson to be more than just a spouse. She demonstrated that beauty and hope can emerge from the worst of times. David Gilmour, who is now 79 years old, prefers to spend his time away from the spotlight with his family. His life is centered around his wife, Polly Sampson, with whom he has been married since 1994, and who has penned the lyrics to most of his personal songs. They have 8 offspring between the 2 sets of parents. Their marriage yielded 4 children, while his first marriage produced 4 more. Their presence continues to round his life, even if the children are grown. Some of them, including Romany and Gabriel, have joined him on stage to sing backup vocals or sing along to his songs. After years of being a stage, Gilmour's home is now a family circle, complete with grandkids playing on the floor and evenings spent in Sussex or on the Etoria, with Polly close by, and the river beyond the windows. He has managed to avoid becoming the stereotypical rock star who is engulfed in excess, despite having an estimated fortune of more than 180 million. His true treasures were never rows of marble garages or mansions in Hollywood. Rather, they were spaces where quiet could be transformed into melody, and where music might breathe. He became one of the most famous record producers in the world after purchasing the Ettoria, a Victorian wooden houseboat permanently moored on the River Thames, in 1986. The glass walls faced the river, and inside were the birthplace of albums, A Brief Loss of Reason, The Division Bell, and numerous of his solo compositions. The Ettoria is more than simply property even now. It resounds like a floating cathedral, Medina House, an 8,000-square-foot mansion on the Hoveve coastline in Sussex, was restored with his heart and soul. The property was more of a sanctuary than a trophy, when its worth dropped from the 15 million to fee 10 million, and then nearly 9 million following legal battles. A spot where the sound of music seemed to float on the ocean breezes, and where open windows let in the sea breezes. Outside of England, he had a Greek property that was for sale for 1.5 million, where the sun and quiet of the Mediterranean bathed his days. When he was on land, his desires were like engines. He had an impressive collection of Ferraris, the most renowned of which being the 1988 F40 he and Nick Mason had retrieved from the Fiorano racetrack. A musician and his friend, a rock star, drove it back across Europe themselves, playing boy racers on the highways. Afterwards, the vehicle was shown off with pride at the Birmingham Motor Show. However, if automobiles were a love, then flying was a destiny. Gilmour acquired and restored a collection of vintage planes through his business, Intrepid Aviation, a rare SNJ-7C, along with P-51 Mustangs, Beech Stagger Wings, Boeing Stearmans, Yak-50s and Yak-50s 2.0s. Among the more than 80 films and TV shows that featured his planes was Band of Brothers. He treated these machines with the same respect he did his guitars. They were not frills, but rather pieces of living history, relics created for the express purpose of being perceived orally. Despite having so much money, Gilmour was never a slave to it. His little Venice villa was sold for $3.6 million in 2003, and he donated every penny to Crisis, a charity that helps electric vehicle, EV homeless people. The Black Strat, the instrument that played Shine on You Crazy Diamond and Comfortably Numb, was one of 120 guitars he sold in 2019. He gave the entire $21.5 million he made at the auction, which included the roughly $4 million sale of the centerpiece, to Client Earth. Small actions conveyed a great deal. In memory of Douglas Adams, who proposed the name, the Division Bell, we are donating 25 Zalozen to help save rhinos. He conveyed his point clearly. Things like guitars, cars, planes, and property were all temporary. The only thing that counted was the returnable value. My guitars were a great asset to me, he commented quietly. He continues to play, sing, and tour, but now he says, but it's time for them to serve the planet. His steps are slower, and his hair is white. However, it appears as though time stands still as his fingertips brush against the strings. Like the delicate, limitless, unbroken breath suspended between life and death, a solitary note reaches towards the heavens. He now leads a low-key life, taking leisurely strolls along the blustery Sussex coast, and caring to his garden with the same care he once bestowed upon a melody, all while listening to the river murmur outside his window in the Ettoria. Even if he looks old, the sound is as fresh as ever. Although the body may age gracefully, the spirit remains unmoved. Silence and a delicate symphony with Polly Sampson, his wife Muse, and Anchor, now envelop him. He has created a life where love transforms into teamwork. She crafts verses. They become audible when he inhales them. Everyone gets in, including the kids. Between the 2 points, Romany's voice quivers. Their house transforms from a mere structure into a vibrant orchestra, because to Gabriel and Charlie's contributions, a family portrait depicted in chords and verses, Luck and Strange 2024 was not your typical record. One more thing. The strength of art isn't always in the show, but in the feeling of belonging it evokes. Whether he's performing in New York or Los Angeles or Rome's Circus Maximus, he's no longer performed solo. A circle of memories, blood, and bond surrounds him. Shadows, however, never let go of their grip. He looks over and sees that just one of the elderly guards is still standing. Drummer Nick Mason, rock solid. Always an ally, never an enemy, now a symbol of what was once lost. His longtime companion Syd Barrett has lost his mind. His reserved brother Rick Wright passed away at the age of 65 from cancer. Separated by pain that no melody could mend, waters cut apart from one another. The group has shrunk from 4 members to 2. The weight of Mason's absence is carried in every grin shared with him. The absence of people present makes each practice seem more intense. Today, even the sound of their 1988 Ferrari road trip, complete with laughter, seems like a specter following them over deserted highways. Either the delight or the stillness is genuine. Paradoxically, this is the twilight of David Gilmour. A fortune that would last a lifetime and a half, but would be meaningless. Gathering as a family in the room that was once filled with raucous revelers, yet forever overshadowed by those who were not present. No amount of money or number of stadium lights can measure his impact. His legacy will live on through the music he has made, metamorphosing loss into beauty, life into memory, and quiet into speaking. The finest heroes he demonstrates do not have to yell to be heard. The universe comes to a halt as they manipulate a single sound. Paying attention. Post a comment if you've ever felt something you couldn't put your finger on because of David Gilmour. Wish you were here in the Division Bell where you initially encountered him, on the moon's dark side. Or maybe there was only one solo that has stuck with you all these years. Let us continue to bring his music into the light, into the silence, and into every heart it can still touch by leaving a like and a tribute.